The Buried Truck, a journey of resistance, dignity, and ancestral heritage. Welcome, dear listeners, to a story that transcends time and teaches us about the silent strength of those who never give up their most sacred rights. Today, we will travel to 1980s Mexico, where a humble family will discover that their roots run deeper than they ever imagined. This is the story of Javier Herrera and his 3 children, who found buried in the earth not just an old truck, but an entire legacy of dignity and justice. A question before we begin: from which city or country are you listening to us? Leave it in the comments. I love knowing where the hearts that connect with these stories come from. And don't forget, if this narrative moves you as it moves me, leave a like and subscribe to the channel and for more stories that nourish the soul. Year: 1986. Place: Guadalajara, Mexico. Dawn came slowly over the adobe houses on the outskirts of Guadalajara, as if it too carried the weight of unshed tears. September 1986 brought with it the dry air and red dust that settled on all things, on the tile roofs, on the clothes hanging in the courtyards, on the heart of Javier Herrera. Sitting on the threshold of his small house, Javier watched the timid movement of the street. His hands, calloused from 20 years working as a mechanic, trembled slightly as he held a cup of watery coffee. 10 months. 10 months since Esperanza had departed, taking with her not only the light of her brown eyes, but also any certainty that life could be gentle. The sound of small footsteps echoed through the house. Paloma, his 11-year-old daughter, appeared in the doorway carrying a basin of warm water. Her movements were precise, too mature for her age, a melancholic dance of responsibilities that a child should not know. "Papa, the water is ready for Diego to wash," she whispered, her voice carrying that delicacy that so reminded him of her mother. Javier nodded in silence. Words had become precious coins in his house. He spent them sparingly, as if each one pronounced could drain even more of what little remained of his strength. From the back room came the low murmur of Diego telling Lucia a story. The 9-year-old boy had developed the habit of inventing fantastic adventures to distract his 6-year-old sister, who since their mother's death had carried with her a worn rag doll, as if it were an amulet against all the fears of the world. The house breathed poverty, but a dignified poverty. The adobe walls stood firm, decorated only with an image of the Virgin of Guadalupe and a faded photograph of Javier and Esperanza's wedding. The packed earth floor was always clean, swept every morning by Paloma with the dedication of one who understands that cleaning the house is also cleaning the soul. Javier closed his eyes and breathed deeply. The aroma of tortillas that Paloma was preparing for breakfast mixed with the smell of wet earth from the previous night, a brief rain that had washed the streets but failed to clean the worries weighing on his shoulders. 4 months. 4 months since he had lost the mechanic shop for being unable to pay the debts accumulated after the expenses of the birth and Esperanza's funeral. The hands that once repaired engines with the precision of an artisan now remained idle, seeking work in a city where jobs were as scarce as rain in the desert. Don Ramon Castillo, the house owner, had been patient until then. A man with a graying mustache and a heart softer than he liked to admit, he had known Esperanza since she was a child and respected Javier's pain. But patience, like all earthly things, had its limits. 3 months of overdue rent was a debt that screamed louder than any compassion. Until the end of October, Don Ramon had said in his last visit, avoiding looking directly into Javier's eyes. "I'm sorry, compadre, but I also have my family to feed." October meant 6 weeks. 6 weeks to find a miracle or watch his children carry their few belongings toward an uncertain destiny. Paloma approached again, now bringing 3 warm tortillas wrapped in a cloth. Her eyes, large and expressive like her mother's, reflected a concern that broke Javier's heart. "Papa," she murmured hesitantly, "maybe I could ask for work at Doña Mercedes's house. She always says she needs help with cleaning." The phrase hung in the air like a painful prayer. Javier felt something contract in his chest. His daughter, who dreamed of becoming a teacher, offering to work as a maid at 11 years old. Life's injustice had never seemed so cruel. He extended his hand and gently touched the girl's face, feeling the softness of her childish skin against the roughness of his working palms. "No, mija, you're going to keep studying. Your place is in school, learning to become the teacher you always wanted to be." But even as he pronounced those words with all the conviction he could muster, a question echoed in his mind like a funeral bell. How to protect his children's dreams when reality had become a nightmare from which it seemed impossible to wake. The next morning brought something unexpected. Javier was repairing a yard fence, a small job that Don Ramon had offered him out of pity, when Diego came running down the street, his leather sandals hitting the dirt ground like small drums of urgency. "Papa! Papa!" the boy shouted, holding a yellowed envelope against his chest. The mailman brought a letter for our family. Letters were rare in the Herrera family's life. Javier wiped his hands on the cloth and took the envelope with curiosity. The paper was of different texture, thicker, and exhaled a light aroma of roses and copal, a perfume that brought him a strange sensation of familiarity. The postmark was from Tonalá, a nearby city known for its artisans and ceramists. The handwriting, written in blue ink, was delicate and feminine, each letter formed with the care of someone who learned to write when education was a privilege of few. Paloma and Lucia approached, attracted by the novelty. Little Lucia hugged her ragdoll against her chest, her large eyes fixed on the envelope, as if she sensed that this piece of paper carried within it something that would change their lives. Javier opened the envelope carefully, as if handling a sacred object. The letter was written in the same delicate handwriting as the envelope. "Dear Mr. Herrera, I knew your wife Esperanza when she was still a young woman who frequented the Tonalá market with her grandmother. She was a bright-eyed girl who always asked about the ancient stories of the families in our region. I learned of her departure and the suffering your family faces. As an old comadre who keeps ancient secrets, I feel the time has come to reveal something that may bring relief to your hearts. Esperanza carried in her veins the blood of the Santana Herrera family, a lineage that possessed sacred lands in our region for generations. There exists a lost inheritance that rightfully belongs to your children. If you wish to know the truth about the lost inheritance, go to kilometer 52 of the old road to Chapala. You will find a path marked with small stone pyramids that our ancestors left as a sign. Follow that path to the Cerro del Águila Dorada and walk exactly 750 steps north. The earth keeps secrets for those who know where to look." A comadre of the family. The silence that followed was charged with astonishment and disbelief. Diego was the first to break the spell. "Papa, it's like in the stories of hidden treasures, like in the tales Mama used to tell." Paloma, always more practical, frowned. "But Papa, how do we know if this is true? It could be someone trying to deceive us." Javier reread the letter, feeling a strange tingling run down his spine. There was something in the way the mysterious sender mentioned Esperanza, intimate details about his wife that few knew. Esperanza had indeed spoken about visits to the Tonalá market with her grandmother, about ancient stories she heard but never fully revealed. Lucia, who had remained silent, approached Javier and touched his hand with her small fingers. "Papito, Mama's doll is warm," she whispered. "It always gets warm when Mama wants to tell us something." Javier felt a shiver. From a very young age, Lucia demonstrated a peculiar sensitivity, a connection with things that adults couldn't see or understand. Esperanza used to say that the girl had inherited the gift of her great-grandmother, a respected healer in the region. The afternoon passed slowly, but the letter remained in Javier's mind like an insistent melody. He read and reread it, analyzing every word, every possibility. His family's situation was desperate. Losing the house would mean separating the children, sending them to distant relatives who barely managed to support their own families. When night came and the children finally fell asleep, Javier went out to the small back patio. The sky was clear, sprinkled with stars that shone with particular intensity at that altitude. He looked up and whispered a prayer that was more plea than belief. "Esperanza, mi amor, if there's any truth in this letter, give me a sign. Our children need hope, and I no longer know how to protect them." A gentle breeze blew at that moment, carrying the aroma of roses and copal, exactly the same perfume he had felt in the letter. And for an instant, Javier was certain that his wife was there, whispering in his ear that sometimes miracles come disguised as yellowed letters written by mysterious comadres. The next day, he would make a decision that would change his family's destiny forever. Sunday dawned with the sky painted in golden and pink tones, as if the universe itself knew that this would not be an ordinary day in the Herrera family's life. Javier had spent the night awake, weighing the risks of following the mysterious letter's instructions. By dawn, his decision was made. They had very little to lose, and perhaps much to gain. Paloma prepared a small provision for the journey: tortillas wrapped in clean cloth, a bottle of tepache that had fermented in the kitchen, and some fruits they managed to buy at the market. Diego organized in his school backpack a small iron bar he had found in the remains of Javier's workshop, along with a blessed candle that Esperanza kept for special occasions. Lucia, wearing her best blue dress, inherited from an older cousin, firmly held her rag doll. The girl had insisted that the doll also needed to be well dressed for the adventure, as Diego had christened the expedition. The walk to the main road took 3 hours. Javier carried Lucia on his shoulders when she got tired, feeling his daughter's light weight as a sacred responsibility. Paloma walked beside him, her attentive eyes observing every detail of the path, recording in memory every reference that could help them on the return. Diego followed a few steps ahead, his childish enthusiasm transforming the journey into a great adventure. He collected interesting stones along the way, keeping them in his pockets like small trophies of the expedition. "Papa, do you think we're going to find gold?" he asked at one point, his eyes shining with expectation. "I don't know, mijo," Javier replied, adjusting Lucia on his shoulders, "but sometimes the most valuable treasures aren't made of gold." When they finally reached kilometer 52 of the old road to Chapala, the sun was already in the middle of the sky. The place was exactly as the letter had described, a semi-arid area, covered with thorny bushes and cacti, with low hills extending to the horizon. It was Paloma who first spotted the stone pyramids, small conical constructions, made with dark volcanic rocks, spread in a line that headed toward the interior of the landscape. They were ancient, very ancient, covered with lichens and moss that spoke of decades, perhaps centuries of existence. "Here," Javier murmured, feeling a shiver of reverence. "The pyramids our ancestors left as a sign." The path they followed wound among the bushes, gradually ascending toward the Cerro del Águila Dorada. The hill's name made sense. Its rocks had a golden coloration that intensified under the midday sun, creating reflections that seemed to send luminous messages to the sky. Lucia, who had slept during part of the walk, awakened when they reached the hill's summit. She pointed to a specific point in the landscape ahead and said, with the peculiar seriousness of small children, "There, Papito. Mama is saying it's there." Javier felt his heart accelerate. He didn't question his daughter's words. He had learned to respect her special sensitivity. He positioned himself at the point she had indicated and began to walk north, counting each step aloud. 1, 2, 3. His voice echoed through the silent landscape. Diego and Paloma accompanied him, also counting, their childish voices mixing with his in a mathematical chant that gained airs of sacred ritual. 100, 101, 102. The terrain changed gradually. The vegetation became denser, and the softer ground indicated the presence of underground water. Small wildflowers sprouted among the stones, creating patches of color that seemed to celebrate their passage. 500, 501. Lucia had begun to murmur quietly to her doll, as if telling important secrets. From time to time she looked around with an expression of recognition, as if she already knew that place from some ancient dream. 700, 701. Javier's heart beat stronger with each step. 740, 745, 750. The four voices shouted in unison. They stopped exactly where they were. The place didn't seem to have anything special at first sight. A small clearing surrounded by bushes, with the ground covered by dry leaves and small stones. But there was something in the air, a different energy, as if that piece of earth kept ancient secrets. It was then that Diego, always the most observant for details, pointed to the ground. "Papa, look, the stones form a circle." Javier crouched down and began to brush away the dry leaves. Slowly, a perfect circle of black volcanic stones emerged from the ground, each one the size of a closed fist, arranged with geometric precision that could not be the work of chance. In the center of the circle, the earth was slightly lower, as if something had been buried there for a long time. Javier took the small bar that Diego was carrying and began to dig carefully. The earth was loose, easy to remove. A few centimeters deep, the bar struck something metallic with a dull and hollow sound that echoed through the clearing like a bell announcing discoveries. "My God," Paloma whispered, kneeling beside her father. What emerged from the ground, as Javier dug with growing excitement, was the hood of an old truck buried vertically in the earth, as if it had been planted there to grow toward the center of the world. The discovery of the buried truck left the Herrera family silent for long moments. It wasn't the type of silence born from doubt, but from reverence, as when one stands before something sacred that demands contemplation before action. The vehicle was a Ford cargo truck from the 1960s, its faded blue paint still visible in some parts of the body. It was buried in such a way that only the upper part of the cab was accessible, creating a surreal image, a truck sprouting from the earth like a tree of metal and memories. Javier continued excavating around the cab until he managed to open the driver's door. The creak of oxidized metal broke the afternoon silence, followed by an aroma that enveloped them like an embrace from the past. Aged leather, pine wood, and something more subtle, the perfume of roses and copal they had already felt in the mysterious letter. "Paloma, get the candle," Javier asked, his voice loaded with contained emotion. The girl obeyed, and when Javier lit the blessed candle, its golden light revealed the truck's interior like a small altar preserved by time. The seats were covered by sarapes woven in colors that still maintained their vivacity: earth red, sky blue, and corn yellow, the colors of the Mexican flag intertwined in patterns that told silent stories. On the passenger seat, carefully arranged, were 3 leather chests, small and resistant trunks that seemed to have waited decades for that moment. On the cab floor, partially covered by an embroidered sarape, were pine wood crates marked with hot iron. Lucia, who had remained quiet until then, approached the open door and whispered, "Mama is here, Papito, she's smiling." Diego, unable to contain his curiosity, craned his neck to see better. "Papa, it's as if someone had prepared everything for us, as if they knew we would come." Javier took the first chest and opened it carefully. Inside, protected by silk fabrics, were ancient documents written on parchment paper. Some were so delicate they seemed to whisper when touched by the breeze entering through the open door. "Hacienda Santana," Paloma read over her father's shoulder, deciphering the elaborate script of one of the documents. "Sacred lands," Javier continued, reading another paper. "Herrera family," Diego completed, pointing to a third sheet. Javier's hands trembled slightly as he handled the documents. They were deeds, contracts, property titles dated decades earlier. Some were in Old Spanish, others in a mixture of Spanish and indigenous language that spoke of times when cultures intertwined more harmoniously. The second chest revealed yellowed photographs and personal letters tied with red ribbons. The photographs showed a peasant family posing in front of a large adobe house, surrounded by cornfields that extended to the horizon. A tall, dignified man with a thick mustache stood in the center of the image, surrounded by a sweet-looking woman and several children. "Esperanza had these same eyes," Javier murmured, delicately touching one of the photographs. The third chest contained what seemed to be the most important document, an elaborate will with notarial seal and signatures in ink that had resisted time. The date was clearly visible: December 12th, 1984. "Testament of Rodolfo Santana Herrera," read the header in ornate letters. Javier began to read aloud, his voice gaining strength as he understood the magnitude of what he was discovering. "I, Rodolfo Santana Herrera, in full use of my mental faculties and sensing that my time on this earth is coming to an end, leave by means of this testament all my property and goods to my direct descendants." The document continued describing lands, urban properties, and inheritance rights that seemed enormous for a peasant family of the 1980s. It mentioned terrain where some of the region's most productive maquiladoras currently stood, properties that had been sold for urban expansion, and rights over waters and minerals. "The estimated value of the entire inheritance is 280 million pesos, Javier continued, his voice almost failing. Paloma sighed deeply. "Papa, it means we're not poor," Diego said with children's frankness. "It means someone stole what was ours." Javier continued examining the documents until he found a personal letter, handwritten in the same delicate script they had seen in the mysterious letter. It was a message from Rodolfo to his descendants. "My dear children of the future, if you are reading this letter, it's because the new rich of Guadalajara achieved what they wanted: my death and the theft of our lands. They pressured our family for years, using methods that would shame our ancestors. They knew our family keeps ancient traditions, that our women are respected healers, that our connection to the land goes beyond simple ownership. They fear what they don't understand and covet what they cannot buy honestly. The curses they brought upon themselves by stealing sacred lands will one day turn against them. The land doesn't forget who truly loves it. Keep these documents as you keep your prayers. One day justice will find its way. Rodolfo Santana Herrera, 1984. The sun was beginning to set when they finished examining all the documents. The Herrera family remained silent for long minutes, processing the magnitude of their discovery. Lucia was the first to speak. "Now can we stay in our house, Papito?" And in that simple question, asked with the absolute confidence of a 6-year-old girl, Javier found all the determination he needed to face the battle that was to come. The 3 days following the discovery of the buried truck brought to Javier's life a disturbing mixture of hope and anxiety. During the day, he divided his time between job searching, which now seemed less desperate, and the careful organization of all the documents found. During the night, he studied each paper by candlelight, trying to fully understand what he had inherited. Paloma had assumed the role of family scribe, copying in a school notebook the most important names, dates, and values from the documents. Her small, careful handwriting filled page after page with information that seemed to come from a dream: urban properties, rural lands, water rights, lease contracts. Diego transformed the discovery into one of his epic stories, telling Lucia imaginary adventures about great-grandfather Rodolfo and his battles against the evil new rich. Little Lucia listened to every word with solemn attention, her rag doll always nestled in her arms. It was Thursday morning when Javier decided to seek legal help. He put on his best shirt, a white piece that Esperanza had embroidered with small blue flowers, and headed to downtown Guadalajara in search of a lawyer who could guide him on how to proceed. Licenciado Carlos Villanueva's office was in a 2-story building near the Central Market. He was a middle-aged man with a prominent belly and thick glasses, who mainly served small merchants and peasant families. His reputation in the community was solid: honest, hard-working, and someone who wasn't intimidated by powerful adversaries. "Señor Herrera," Villanueva said, after examining some of the documents for over an hour, "what you brought here is extraordinary. These documents appear authentic, and if what they indicate is true, your family was the victim of systematic dispossession that lasted decades." The lawyer explained that it would be necessary to consult the public property registry, verify the current deeds of the mentioned lands, and discover how the properties had changed hands over the years. "I can tell you something in advance, Señor Herrera," Villanueva continued, his expression becoming grave. "A good part of the lands mentioned in these documents today belong to Constructora Industrial Tapatia, a relatively new company, founded in 1985 by one Emilio Restrepo." The name kept resonating in Javier's mind during the entire journey home. Emilio Restrepo, a name that meant nothing to him, but somehow sounded threatening, like the distant roar of an approaching storm. The next afternoon, the first clouds of that storm began to form. Javier was working in his small back garden when Diego came running from school, his face red with excitement and fear. "Papa! Papa! Some men went to school asking about our family." "What men, mijo?" "Men in suits, Papa. They talked to the principal, asked where we live, if you were working, if our family had money problems." Paloma arrived shortly after, leading Lucia by the hand. Her eyes shone with contained tears. "Papa, they also went to the market where I buy our vegetables. They asked Doña Carmen about us, wanted to know if we received any letters lately, if you've been talking about inheritances or old documents." Javier felt a chill run down his spine. How could someone know about the letter, or about his visit to the lawyer? He had been discreet, careful. The answer came the next morning, brought by Don Ramon. The house owner appeared earlier than usual, his countenance worried and restless. He carried in his hands a brown leather folder. "Compadre," he said, avoiding Javier's gaze, "we need to talk." They sat at the small wooden table in the kitchen. Don Ramon opened the folder and took out a letterhead sheet and a sealed envelope. "Last night I received a visit from a licenciado, an elegant, well-dressed man who introduced himself as legal representative of Constructora Industrial Tapatia." Javier felt his stomach contract. "He offered me this." Don Ramon slid the envelope across the table. 35,000 pesos to accelerate your eviction. He said you've been spreading stories about false documents, trying to blackmail respectable businessmen in the city." The silence that followed was charged with tension. Javier could hear his heart beating in his ears. "And what did you respond, Don Ramon?" The older man sighed deeply. "I responded that you're an honorable man, that I've known your wife since she was a child, and that if someone in this story is lying, it's not you." Don Ramon pushed the envelope back to the other side of the table. "But I also told him I can't afford to make powerful enemies. I have other properties, other tenants. This licenciado made it clear that Restrepo's company has influences in City Hall, in the police." Paloma, who had listened to the conversation from the kitchen door, slowly approached. "Papa, what does this mean?" Javier looked at his daughter, then at Don Ramon, finally at his own hands. His mechanic's hands, calloused and honest, that had never been stained with lies or corruption. It means, Mija, that we discovered something that powerful people would prefer remained hidden. Don Ramon stood up, adjusting his hat on his head. Compadre, I give you 2 weeks in addition to the original deadline. I can't do more than that. But if you really possess legitimate documents, fight for them. Sometimes justice needs the courage of simple men to manifest. After Don Ramon left, Javier remained sitting at the table, looking at the envelope full of money that represented a choice: accept the bribe and keep his family in the relative safety of invisibility, or fight for legitimate rights and face the consequences of challenging established power. It was Lucia who made the decision for him. The girl approached silently and placed her rag doll on the table right on top of the envelope. Papito, Mama says dirty money stains your hands. And in that simple observation from a 6-year-old girl, Javier found all the wisdom he needed. The decision to reject the bribe brought Javier a strange sensation of relief mixed with apprehension. It was as if he had crossed an invisible line, entering a territory where the rules were different and the dangers more real, but where his conscience could finally breathe freely. Saturday morning, while Paloma and Diego played in the courtyard and Lucia chatted quietly with her doll, an unexpected visit would change the course of their struggle. An elderly woman, dressed in black and carrying a palm basket, approached the house with slow but determined steps. She was small and wrinkled like a raisin, but her black eyes shone with a sharp intelligence that seemed capable of reading people's deepest intentions. She wore an embroidered rebozo over her shoulders, and her hands, stained by age, held a carved wooden staff. "Señor Javier Herrera?" she asked with a voice that recalled the whisper of dry leaves. "Yes, señora. How may I serve you?" The woman smiled, revealing few teeth but much affection. "I am Dolores Santana. I was the one who wrote you the letter." Javier felt his heart stop for a moment. This was the mysterious comadre who had initiated the entire journey. He invited her in, and Dolores accepted with a gracious nod. Seated at the kitchen table, Dolores opened her basket and began to remove objects that seemed to come from a museum of family memories. Yellowed photographs, letters tied with ribbons, and an embroidered rebozo with maps and symbols that Javier couldn't decipher. "I was 18 when I met your Esperanza," Dolores began, her hands caressing one of the photographs. "She came to the Tonalá market with her grandmother to buy medicinal herbs. She was a curious girl, always asking questions about the ancient stories of families." Dolores explained that she had been a midwife for 50 years, helping to bring 3 generations of children into the world in the region. Throughout all that time, she had kept secrets, stories, and documents of the families she served. "I was the one who helped at Esperanza's birth," she revealed, her eyes shining with contained tears. "And I was the one who prepared her for her final journey when she departed after Lucia's birth." The mention of his wife made Javier feel a knot in his throat. Dolores perceived his emotion and extended one of her wrinkled hands to touch his. "She asked me to take care of her family if something happened, to protect what rightfully belonged to her children." Paloma, who had approached silently, sat beside the table. "Señora Dolores, how did you know about the buried documents?" The old healer smiled. "Mija, I was the one who helped Rodolfo bury that truck in 1984. He was being threatened by powerful men who wanted his lands. He knew he wouldn't live much longer, so he asked me to keep the secret until the right moment arrived." Dolores opened the embroidered rebozo, revealing that the patterns weren't just decorative, they were a detailed map showing the location of the buried truck, the original boundaries of the Santana family lands, and even the position of springs and sacred sites. "Rodolfo told me, 'Comadre, when my descendants are in true need, when injustice threatens to destroy our family, then reveal the secret.'" Diego, who had heard everything from the doorway, approached with shining eyes. "Then you're like a magical guardian, like in the stories Mama used to tell." Dolores laughed, a melodious sound that filled the small kitchen. "I'm not magical, mijito. I'm just a woman who understands that some truths need to wait for the right moment to be revealed." The conversation was interrupted by Lucia's arrival, who had been playing in the courtyard. The girl stopped in the doorway and stared at Dolores with her large dark eyes. Then slowly, she approached the old woman and extended her rag doll. "Mama says you have healing hands," she murmured. "Can you bless my doll?" Dolores received the doll with reverence, as if it were a sacred object. She closed her eyes and murmured words in a language that mixed Spanish with more ancient, deeper sounds. When she returned the doll to Lucia, the girl smiled for the first time since her mother's death. "Now," Dolores said, turning to Javier, "we need to talk about Emilio Restrepo and the dangers your family will face." The old woman explained that she had investigated Constructora Industrial Tapatia since its foundation. She discovered that Restrepo had arrived in Guadalajara in 1984, exactly the same year as Rodolfo's death, coming from Medellin, Colombia, with capital of dubious origin. "He didn't come just to build houses," Dolores said gravely. "He came to launder money and acquire properties for less legitimate activities." Javier felt a chill. What kind of activities? The same ones that are beginning to grow throughout Jalisco, Señor Herrera. Drugs, smuggling, corruption of public officials. Dolores revealed that she had documented Restrepo's illegal practices for 2 years: bribes to municipal officials, threats to peasant families, falsification of property documents. "I have names, dates, evidence, but we need to be very careful. This man won't hesitate to use violence against a family with children," Paloma asked with a maturity that broke Javier's heart. "What should we do, Señora Dolores?" The old healer looked at each family member before responding. "We're going to fight, mijita, but we're going to fight intelligently. I have 18 Ejido families who are willing to testify against Restrepo. I have contacts in Mexico City, journalists who specialize in exposing rural corruption." She paused, her eyes fixing on Javier. "But first, we need to put you in a safe place. Restrepo won't delay in intensifying his threats." As if her words had invoked danger, at that moment they heard the sound of car engines stopping in front of the house. Dolores moved surprisingly quickly for a woman her age, running to the window. "Police," she whispered. "They come with documents in their hands." And in that moment, the Herrera family understood that their struggle had officially begun. What followed was a calculated demonstration of power that left the Herrera family stunned by its bureaucratic brutality. 3 state police officers, accompanied by a public ministry official and a notary, invaded the small house with search warrants that seemed to have been written by someone who intimately knew the Herrera family's situation. The lead officer, a corpulent man with a thick mustache and immaculate uniform, presented the documents to Javier with a courtesy that couldn't completely disguise the contempt in his eyes. "Señor Herrera, we have a judicial order to search this property for falsified documents and evidence of attempted blackmail against respectable businessmen of this city." Dolores, who had remained seated at the kitchen table with apparent tranquility, observed every movement of the officers with attentive eyes. At a certain moment, she whispered something quietly to Lucia, and the girl discreetly left through the back door carrying her rag doll. The search was thorough and humiliating. The police turned over every drawer, every box, every piece of fabric in the house. They found and confiscated all the documents the family had kept from the buried truck, in addition to personal photographs, letters from Esperanza, and even Paloma and Diego's school notebooks. The most painful moment came when one of the officers found Lucia's rag doll, which had been intentionally left on the kitchen table. With brusque movements, he tore the doll in half, revealing that small documents were hidden inside the stuffing. "Very clever," the officer exclaimed, showing the papers to his colleagues. "Using children's toys to hide evidence." Paloma began to cry silently, not for the doll itself, but for the cruel symbolism of what she had just witnessed. Grown men destroying the last physical link that Lucia maintained with her dead mother. Javier, who until then had remained calm, stepped forward. "This is an injustice. These documents legitimately belong to my family." "Legitimately?" the lead officer interrupted with a cold smile. "Señor Herrera, you're being investigated for falsification of historical documents, attempted extortion against established companies, and possible association with subversive elements that threaten the state's economic development." The accusations were absurd, but Javier understood that logic wasn't relevant in that situation. This was a show of force, a warning of what could happen if he continued pursuing his legal rights. When the officers finally left, taking with them boxes full of documents and personal belongings, the Herrera house seemed to have been hit by a hurricane. Overturned furniture, clothes scattered on the floor, broken drawers, the sanctuary that Esperanza had created with so much love was destroyed. Dolores, who had remained silent during the entire operation, slowly stood up and began to help the family reorganize their belongings. "This was expected," she said calmly. "Restrepo wanted to show us that he has powerful connections, that he can move important pieces on the local political chessboard." Lucia returned an hour later, carrying her intact doll. She had followed Dolores's whispered instructions and hidden the real doll, the one that actually contained the most important documents, at a neighbor's house. The doll they tore was just a decoy, Dolores explained with a sly smile. I learned during 70 years of life that we must always have a second line of defense. But Restrepo's show of force hadn't ended. During the following 3 days, the family was subjected to a systematic intimidation campaign. Unknown men appeared at the market where Paloma bought vegetables, asking questions about the family and making it clear they were being watched. Diego reported that a car with dark windows had circulated several times around his school. Don Ramon received a new visit from Restrepo's legal representative, this time accompanied by 2 men who didn't identify themselves as lawyers. The community priest, Father Miguel, was questioned by municipal officials about possible subversive activities in his Sunday masses. The pressure culminated on Sunday morning, when Javier was leaving for Mass with his children. A black Mercedes stopped in front of the house, and 3 men in dark suits got out. One of them, clearly the leader, approached Javier with measured steps. It was Emilio Restrepo himself, tall, elegant, with graying hair combed with gel and a well-trimmed mustache. He had the appearance of a respectable businessman, but his eyes, small, cold and calculating, betrayed a cruelty that made Javier instinctively position himself between the man and his children. "Señor Herrera," Restrepo said with an accent that revealed his Colombian origin, "I believe we have a misunderstanding that needs to be resolved." His voice was soft, almost gentle, but carried an implicit threat that made Paloma take Diego's hand and pull him closer to the house. "There's no misunderstanding, Señor Restrepo," Javier replied, surprising himself with the firmness of his own voice. "Just a man defending his family's legitimate rights." Restrepo smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Legitimate rights. Do you know what the problem with legitimate rights is, Señor Herrera? They sometimes conflict with the practical realities of modern life." He made a subtle gesture with his hand, and his 2 companions positioned themselves to block the neighbor's view. "I'm a reasonable man, a businessman who understands the needs of working families. I can offer you employment, a better house for your children, quality education. In exchange for what?" Javier asked. "In exchange for you forgetting this fantasy about old documents and impossible inheritances. In exchange for you protecting your lovely family from unnecessary complications." The threat was now explicit. Restrepo was looking directly at Paloma as he pronounced the words "lovely family." It was then that Lucia, who had remained silent behind her father, stepped forward, her large dark eyes fixed on Restrepo with an intensity that made the man step back slightly. "My mama says you have dark stains around your heart," the girl said with the devastating simplicity of small children. "She says the stains grow every time you hurt a family." The silence that followed was tense and ominous. Restrepo looked at the girl with an expression that mixed surprise and irritation, as if he had just been challenged by someone who shouldn't have courage for such a thing. "A very interesting little girl," he finally murmured. "It would be a shame if something disturbed her innocence." And with those words loaded with veiled threat, Restrepo returned to his Mercedes and left, leaving behind a family that now knew they were facing an enemy, willing to use any method to protect his illicit interests. That night, Dolores appeared again at the Herrera house. This time she came with a concrete proposal. "It's time to leave Guadalajara," she said gravely. "I have a house in Tonalá where you can stay while we organize our counteroffensive. And I have a very important contact I want you to meet." "Who?" Javier asked. "A journalist from Mexico City, a man who specializes in exposing exactly the type of corruption that Emilio Restrepo represents." And so, under the cover of night and with heavy hearts, for leaving the place where Esperanza had been happy, the Herrera family began the next phase of their struggle, a phase that would take them beyond the limits of Guadalajara in search of allies powerful enough to face the corruption machine that threatened to destroy them. Dolores's house in Tonalá was a sanctuary of memories and traditional wisdom, built in colonial style with thick adobe walls, a flowering interior courtyard, and rooms that kept cool even on the hottest days. It offered the Herrera family their first sensation of security in weeks. The walls were decorated with photographs of 5 decades of births, assisted by Dolores, portraits of entire families she had helped bring into the world. There was also a small altar, dedicated to the Virgin of Guadalupe, surrounded by candles, fresh flowers, and ex-votos left by grateful patients. Lucia immediately adapted to the environment. For the first time since her mother's death, the girl seemed relaxed, following Dolores around the house like a small apprentice, observing how the old healer prepared medicinal teas and organized her herbs. Diego had discovered an improvised library, boxes full of old books, birth diaries, and notebooks, where Dolores recorded the stories of the families she served. The boy spent hours reading, feeding his passion for narratives that now gained contours of reality. Paloma, always practical, helped with household chores and took advantage to ask questions about education and study opportunities. Dolores, who had never had children of her own, flourished in the role of adoptive grandmother. Javier, for his part, used the time to emotionally process everything that had happened and prepare for the challenges he knew were coming. The transformation in their lives came on a Wednesday afternoon, when a man of urban appearance appeared at the house door. Tall, thin, wearing glasses and carrying a worn leather briefcase, he had the concentrated air of someone who spends much time thinking about complex problems. "Señora Dolores," he said, removing his hat in an old-fashioned courtesy, "I'm Arturo Mendez, from El Excelsior. I received your message about the Herrera family." Arturo Mendez was a journalist specializing in investigation of agrarian reform and corruption in the Mexican countryside. For 15 years, he had documented cases of dispossession of peasant lands, publishing reports that frequently resulted in federal intervention and imprisonment of corrupt officials. Seated around the solid wood table in Dolores's kitchen, Arturo listened patiently while Javier related the entire story: the mysterious letter, the discovery of the buried truck, the inheritance documents, Restrepo's threats. "What documents do you still possess?" Arturo asked, taking a small recorder from his briefcase. Dolores stood up and went to get Lucia's doll, the real doll, which had escaped police confiscation. Carefully, she opened a small seam in the back of the doll and removed photographs of all the important documents. "I photographed every page before they came to do the search," she explained with a sly smile. 70 years of life taught me to always keep copies." Arturo examined the photographs with growing excitement. Occasionally, he murmured comments to himself. "Extraordinary. This is political dynamite. If it's authentic." "Señor Herrera," he said finally, removing his glasses and cleaning them carefully, "what you possess is potentially the tip of a much larger iceberg. These documents not only prove your family's right to the lands, but also reveal a systematic pattern of dispossession that may involve dozens of other families." Arturo explained that he had been investigating suspicious activities in Jalisco related to the emergence of new capital of dubious origin. Emilio Restrepo's name had appeared several times in his investigations, always connected to questionable real estate transactions and links with local politicians. "I have reasons to suspect that Restrepo isn't just a common, corrupt businessman. There are indications that he may be involved with the emerging drug trafficking that's beginning to establish itself in this region." The revelation left the family in silence. Drug trafficking was a word that until then belonged to the world of newspaper news, something distant that happened in other parts of Mexico. Discovering they were possibly facing a criminal organization much more dangerous than a simple, dishonest businessman was terrifying. "What should we do?" Paloma asked, her voice demonstrating a maturity forced by circumstances. "We're going to make this story public," Arturo responded with determination. "I'm going to write a series of reports for El Excelsior titled The New Latifundists. We're going to expose not only your case, but the entire corruption network that allows this type of injustice." Arturo had contacts at the National Peasant Confederation in Mexico City, human rights organizations, and even honest officials at the Attorney General's office who specialized in crimes against the national economy. "But," he gravely warned, "once we publish this story, there will be no turning back. Restrepo will feel cornered, and cornered men can be very dangerous." Dolores, who had remained silent during most of the conversation, finally spoke. "Señor Mendez, for 70 years I helped peasant families. I saw entire generations expelled from their lands by powerful men who think money places them above justice. If we don't confront these men now, our sacred lands will become centers of corruption that poison the entire region." Her voice, despite her advanced age, carried a strength that came from decades of silent struggle. "It's time for these new latifundists to learn that Mexico's peasant families aren't as defenseless as they think." Arturo smiled, recognizing in the old healer a valuable ally. "Then we're in agreement. I start writing tomorrow. But first, We need to guarantee the Herrera family's safety. It was then that he revealed his most important connection. I know a federal judicial police agent in Mexico City. If we present solid evidence that a local case may have federal ramifications, drug trafficking, corruption of state officials, she can authorize official protection for the family. The agent's name was Ana Beatriz Moreno, and according to Arturo, she had specialized in cases involving drug trafficking infiltration into legitimate business activities. I'm going to contact her tonight, Arturo promised. Meanwhile, I want you to stay here, at Senora Dolores's house. Don't go out alone, don't talk to strangers, don't trust anyone except us three. While Arturo spoke, Lucia approached him and gently touched his hand. Senor journalist, my mama says you have golden light around your head. She says it's the light of people who fight for others. Arturo looked at the girl with surprise and tenderness. He had covered so many stories of injustice, known so many families destroyed by the greed of the powerful, that he sometimes forgot the human motive behind his work. Thank you, pequeña, he murmured. Your mama must have been a very special woman. She was, Lucia replied simply. And now she's taking care of all of us. That night, while the Herrera family slept under Dolores's protective roof, Arturo Mendez worked on his portable typewriter, writing the first report of a series that would shake the power structures in Guadalajara and take the case of a peasant family to the corridors of federal power in Mexico City. The war against injustice had officially begun. Arturo Mendez's first report was published on a Tuesday morning in El Excelsior with the title that would become iconic, The New Latifundists, How Dubious Capital Steals Sacred Lands in Jalisco. The article occupied 2 complete pages and included photographs of the historical documents, maps showing the original boundaries of the Santana family properties, and a detailed analysis of the suspicious transactions that had transferred millions of pesos in properties to Constructora Industrial Tapatia. The impact was immediate and devastating. In Guadalajara, Restrepo's reaction was swift and furious. At 8 in the morning, his lawyers had already filed a defamation lawsuit against El Excelsior. At 10, municipal officials began a routine inspection at lawyer Carlos Villanueva's offices. By noon, 3 vehicles with dark windows were traveling through the streets of Tonalá, clearly searching for the Herrera family. But the positive effects of the report also began to manifest quickly. In Mexico City, Agent Ana Beatriz Moreno from the Attorney General's office read the article during breakfast in her office. A specialist in money laundering cases related to emerging drug trafficking, she immediately recognized the patterns she had been tracking in various regions of the country. At 3 o'clock that same afternoon, her phone rang. Agent Moreno, this is Arturo Mendez, journalist from El Excelsior. We need to talk urgently about a case in Jalisco. I read your report this morning, Senor Mendez. I was just going to contact you. The conversation that followed lasted 2 hours and resulted in a decision that would completely change the conflict's dynamics. The federal judicial police would officially assume investigation of the Herrera case under the jurisdiction of crimes against the national economy and possible laundering of illicit capital. In Tonalá, the family was preparing for bed when the first signs of federal intervention appeared. 2 official vehicles, a black sedan and a white van, stopped in front of Dolores's house. Unlike the state police who had invaded their house in Guadalajara, these officers behaved with professionalism and respect. Ana Beatriz Moreno was a woman of approximately 40 years, black hair pulled back in a severe bun, metal-framed glasses, and a presence that inspired immediate confidence. She wore a navy blue suit and carried a document portfolio that demonstrated meticulous preparation. Senor Herrera, she said after introductions, I've come to inform you that your family is now under official federal protection. Also to notify you that the Attorney General's office has initiated a complete investigation into the activities of Emilio Restrepo and his organization. Ana Beatriz explained that federal investigations had revealed that Constructora Industrial Tapatia was just one of several shell companies used by Restrepo to launder money from illicit activities. The patterns of land acquisition, political connections, and intimidation methods were identical to other cases she had investigated in Michoacán and Sinaloa. Your case, Senor Herrera, represents something much greater than a dispute over family inheritance. You inadvertently discovered a criminal operation that extends across several states. The agent also revealed information that left the family perplexed. Restrepo had arrived in Mexico in 1983, not directly from Medellín, but after a stay in Colombia, where he had been associated with people that Colombian authorities considered extremely dangerous. In other words, Ana Beatriz continued, we're not facing a simple corrupt businessman, but possibly an operative of the Medellin cartel establishing roots and operations in Mexican territory. The revelation completely transformed the family's perspective on what they were facing. Javier felt a chill understanding that his children had been in the crosshairs of an international criminal organization. What does this mean for our family? Paloma asked, again demonstrating maturity forced by circumstances. It means you are now protected witnesses in a federal investigation, Ana Beatriz replied. It means you have the right to police protection, specialized legal assistance, and when the time comes, complete compensation for the damages caused to your family. Ana Beatriz also brought news about the documentary investigations. A team of federal experts had confirmed the authenticity of all documents photographed by Dolores. Moreover, they had discovered that the Herrera case was just one of 47 similar cases in the region, representing a systematic pattern of dispossession dating from the early 1980s. We're building a federal case that could result in up to 25 years in prison for those responsible, she informed. But we need your family to be willing to testify when the time comes. Dolores, who had remained silent during most of the conversation, finally spoke. Agent Moreno, for 70 years I've seen peasant families destroyed by powerful men. If these documents and this testimony can help protect other families, then we have the moral obligation to collaborate. Ana Beatriz smiled, recognizing in the old healer the same determination that had driven some of the bravest women she had known in her career. There's something more, the agent said, opening her portfolio. The investigations revealed that Restrepo acquired his first properties in Jalisco through direct threats to another respected healer in the region. A woman named, she consulted her documents, Esperanza Herrera Santana. The silence that followed was charged with emotion. The family finally understood that the threats that had culminated in Esperanza's death hadn't been just coincidence or cruel fate. My wife, was she being threatened? Javier asked, his voice broken. According to our investigations, yes. Apparently, Restrepo had discovered that she possessed knowledge about the location of historical documents that could threaten his illegal acquisitions. There are testimonies that she received several intimidating visits in the weeks prior to her death. Lucia, who had listened to the entire conversation with her large eyes fixed on Ana Beatriz, slowly approached the agent. Are you going to arrest the bad man who made my mama sad? Ana Beatriz knelt down to be at the girl's height. Little one, I'm going to do everything in my power to ensure that the man who hurt your family pays for his crimes. That's my job, and it's also my promise to you. That night, while the family settled into rooms that now had official protection, Ana Beatriz and Arturo worked until the early hours organizing the strategy for the next phase of the investigation. The case that had begun with a mysterious letter and a buried truck was becoming one of the most important federal investigations of the year. And at the center of it all, a peasant family that refused to accept that injustice would have the last word. Emilio Restrepo's response to federal intervention was more sophisticated and dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Instead of intensifying direct threats, which would only confirm federal suspicions, he decided to attack his opponent's credibility through a systematic campaign of disinformation and institutional corruption. The first phase of the counterattack began on a Sunday morning, during Mass at the small church in Tonalá, where the Herrera family had begun attending. Father Miguel had just started his sermon when 3 elegantly dressed men entered through the main door and sat in the front pews. One of them, a tall man with dark glasses and a grey suit, stood up in the middle of the homily and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. Forgive me, Father Miguel, but there's something the community should know about the people being sheltered in this parish. The silence that followed was tense and embarrassing. Father Miguel, a gentleman of 60 who had spent his entire life serving poor communities, hesitated before responding, This is God's house, Senor. We don't discuss secular matters during worship. But when those matters involve possible danger to the faithful, isn't it our duty to speak? The man continued, taking a folder from his jacket. I have here documents proving that the family known as Herrera is under federal investigation for forging historical documents and attempting to defraud legitimate businesses in our region. The congregation murmured uneasily. Some people turned to look at the Herrera family, who were seated in one of the middle pews. Javier felt his face burn with shame and anger. Furthermore, the man continued with a cold smile, there's evidence that this family has links with subversive elements seeking to destabilize the local economy through unfounded accusations against respectable businessmen. It was Dolores who stood up first. The old healer, with her small stature but immense dignity, walked slowly toward the front of the church. Her voice, despite her age, resonated clear and firm. Brothers and sisters of this community, I know this family. I helped bring the mother of these children into the world. I've seen their pain, their honesty, their struggle for justice. She turned to face the man in the grey suit. And I also recognize the methods of the man you represent. For 70 years I've seen how the powerful use lies and intimidation to steal what doesn't belong to them. The tension in the church was palpable. Some people nodded in support of Dolores, while others seemed confused by the contradictory information. It was then that something unexpected occurred. Lucia, the 6-year-old, broke free from her father's hand and walked toward the front of the church. With her rag doll pressed against her chest, she planted herself directly in front of the man in the grey suit. "You have the same dark stains as the bad man," she said, with the devastating simplicity of small children. "My mama said that when people lie in God's house, the stains grow very fast." The man looked at the girl with an expression of irritation and disdain, but something in his gaze also revealed discomfort. Lucia's absolute innocence and her apparent ability to see things adults couldn't detect left him momentarily speechless. Father Miguel seized the moment to regain control of the situation. "Gentlemen, I ask that you respect the sacred place where we are. If you have legal matters to discuss, there are appropriate places for that. This church will always remain open to any family seeking refuge and prayer." The 3 men left, but the damage was done. Some families in the congregation began treating the Herreras with suspicion, others with more vocal sympathy. The community had been divided, exactly as Restrepo had planned, but the main attack was yet to come. On Monday, Ana Beatriz Moreno received an urgent call from her supervisor in Mexico City. "Agent Moreno, there's a problem with your investigation in Jalisco. We received a formal complaint from the state governor alleging that you're interfering in a legitimate state investigation." "A state investigation of what?" Ana Beatriz asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Witchcraft and subversive activities. Apparently the family you're protecting has been denounced for practicing pagan rituals and attempting to incite peasant revolts using ancient superstitions." Ana Beatriz felt a mixture of indignation and disbelief. "Sir, those accusations are absurd. We're talking about a Catholic family fighting for their legitimate property rights." "I know, Agent, but there's political pressure. The governor has important links in the party, and there are influential businessmen backing the accusations." The conversation that followed was tense. Ana Beatriz had to use all her experience and legal knowledge to convince her superiors that the Herrera case was genuine and that the accusations against the family were obviously fabricated. Meanwhile, in Tonalá, the family faced a new form of pressure. Dolores had gone to the market to buy vegetables when she was approached by 2 women she had known since childhood. "Dolores, is it true you're sheltering people who practice witchcraft? Is it true that family is trying to steal properties belonging to respectable businessmen? Why are you mixing our community into problems with the federal police?" Dolores answered each question with patience and dignity, explaining the true situation. But she could see that some of her oldest neighbors were being influenced by the disinformation campaign. The situation deteriorated when agents from the state attorney's office appeared with an order to exhume Esperanza's body for investigation of possible suspicious death related to witchcraft activities. The news devastated the family. The idea of disturbing Esperanza's rest for political reasons was a desecration that went beyond any limit of human decency. It was Arturo Mendez who brought the news that would again change the course of events. He had been investigating the backgrounds of state officials who were fabricating accusations against the Herrera family when he discovered something extraordinary. "Javier," he said, rushing into Dolores's house, "I found something that's going to blow this case wide open." He showed a folder full of bank documents and transfer records. "All the officials attacking your family received substantial bank deposits in the last 2 weeks. Transfers that can be traced directly to accounts controlled by Constructora Industrial Tapatia." "You mean," Javier began. "I mean we can now prove direct corruption of state public officials." I mean, Restrepo just committed a federal crime that can't be ignored no matter how many politicians he has in his pocket. Ana Beatriz Moreno received the evidence that same afternoon. Over the phone, her voice revealed professional excitement that had been building for weeks. "Senor Mendez, this is exactly what we needed. Corruption of state officials is exclusive federal jurisdiction. Now we can act against Restrepo without any local political interference." That night, while the Herrera family slept under federal protection and all of Tonalá buzzed with rumors and speculation, Ana Beatriz worked in Mexico City, preparing the arrest warrants that would forever change the balance of power in Jalisco. The war against injustice was entering its decisive phase. The dawn of November 8, 1987, exactly 8 months after the discovery of the buried truck, brought with it a federal operation that shook all power structures in Jalisco. At 6 in the morning, simultaneously at 8 different locations, the federal judicial police executed the most ambitious arrest warrants in the state's recent history. Emilio Restrepo was detained at his house in the exclusive Providencia neighborhood, wearing only a silk robe while trying to destroy documents in the fireplace of his luxurious living room. His first reaction was one of aristocratic indignation. "This is an outrage. I have important connections. The governor will be informed." "The governor has already been informed," Ana Beatriz Moreno responded dryly, showing the federal arrest warrant. "And he's also been informed that his administration is under investigation for systematic corruption and links with criminal organizations." Along with Restrepo, 15 accomplices were detained, 3 officials from the Urban Development Secretariat, 5 public notaries, 4 state police commanders, 2 local judges and the state treasury secretary himself. The charges were devastating: criminal association, aggravated dispossession, bribery of public officials, crimes against the national economy, money laundering from illicit activities, intimidation of witnesses and peasant families. But the most shocking evidence was discovered during the search of Constructora Industrial Tapatia offices, a safe containing more than 200 documents proving the existence of a dispossession network that extended throughout the state. The Jalisco model, as Restrepo called it in his private notes, had been applied to 42 peasant families over 3 years. In Tonalá, the Herrera family watched the arrests on television at Dolores's house. The emotion was overwhelming. Years of fear, tension and struggle finally culminating in real justice. Diego, who had carefully documented the family's entire experience in school notebooks, solemnly declared, "Papa, now we can write the ending of our story." But Paloma, always the most practical, had important questions. "Agent Moreno, what happens now with our lands? When can we return home?" Ana Beatriz explained that now the most complex phase of the process would begin. Federal courts would have to determine compensation for all affected families, restore legitimate property titles, and calculate damages for the period of illegal dispossession. "Your family, Senor Herrera, will be the first to be compensated because your documents are the oldest and most complete. But you'll also be the main witnesses in the federal trial against the entire organization." Preparation for the trial took 4 months. During this period, the Herrera family remained under protection at Dolores's house, which had become the operations center for one of the most important investigations in Jalisco's history. Arturo Mendez transformed the case into a series of reports that were syndicated in newspapers throughout Mexico. His work gained national and international recognition, highlighting how peasant families could effectively confront corruption when they had competent and determined allies. The trial's preliminary hearings revealed the true magnitude of Restrepo's criminal operation. Testimonies from arrested officials revealed that he wasn't just a local corrupt businessman, but an operative of the Medellin cartel who had been sent to establish infrastructure in Mexico using stolen properties as operational bases. The connection with drug trafficking added additional federal gravity to the case. The Attorney General's office assigned its most experienced team to ensure that those responsible received the severest possible sentences under Mexican law. Dolores, who served as the main witness about family traditions and the authenticity of historical documents, impressed the court with her dignity and profound knowledge of the issues involved. "Your Honor," she said during her testimony, "I've lived 70 years in this region. I've seen births, I've seen deaths, I've seen families prosper, and I've seen families destroyed by the greed of men without conscience." Her voice, despite her age, carried a moral authority that silenced the entire courtroom. The documents this family found aren't just papers. They're the memory of generations who worked this land with their hands, who loved it, who cared for it. When a man steals this land, he doesn't just steal property, he steals history, he steals identity, he steals the soul of a family. Lucia, now 7 years old, also testified in a special session adapted for minors. Her testimony was brief, but devastating in its simplicity. The bad man came to our house and scared my family. He said he would hurt us if we didn't give him what he wanted. But my mama from heaven didn't let him hurt us. The final sentence was announced on a clear day in March 1988, exactly 2 years after the initial discovery of the buried truck. The federal judge, after 3 hours of deliberation, declared Emilio Restrepo, 25 years federal prison, without possibility of parole for 12 years, plus financial compensation of 280 million pesos for affected families. Each of his accomplices received sentences between 5 and 15 years, depending on their level of involvement in the criminal organization. More importantly, all stolen properties would be restored to their legitimate owners, with complete compensation for the period of illegal dispossession and for profits lost during the years of illegal occupation. For the Herrera family, this meant not only recovery of their ancestral lands, but sufficient resources to transform their lives and the lives of their community. That afternoon, when the family left the federal courthouse, they found hundreds of people gathered in Guadalajara's main plaza. Peasant families from throughout the region had come to celebrate a victory that was also theirs. Javier, carrying Lucia in his arms, while Paloma and Diego walked proudly beside him, found themselves surrounded by applause, shouts of joy, and traditional songs that echoed through the plaza like a celebration of centuries of peasant resistance. Ana Beatriz Moreno approached the family with a smile that revealed professional satisfaction mixed with genuine personal connection. Señor Herrera, your family didn't just recover their inheritance, you changed history. Your courage in facing a powerful criminal organization will inspire other families throughout Mexico. Dolores, now 78 years old but still strong and alert, wrapped her arms around the entire family. Esperanza would be proud, she whispered. Your family honored her memory and proved that sometimes, when right meets courage, justice can triumph over all the corruption in the world. As the Herrera family walked across the plaza toward their new life, Lucia pointed toward the blue sky above Guadalajara. Look, Papa, Mama is smiling. And in that moment, surrounded by community support and with a bright future ahead, Javier felt that finally, after years of pain and struggle, his family had found peace. 2 years after the historic victory in federal court, the Herrera family had transformed not only their own situation, but also the entire social and economic dynamic of their community. The reconstruction process was gradual but profound, built on foundations of restored justice and carefully cultivated opportunities. The Esperanza y Rodolfo Community Center was established on what had been the original Santana family land, a 5-hectare area that now served as headquarters for an innovative and effective peasant organization that quickly gained national recognition. The center offered free legal advice for peasant families, adult literacy classes, and workshops on sustainable agriculture and cooperative economics. Javier had transformed into an unexpected figure of leadership. His experience fighting corruption, combined with his natural humility and integrity, made him a respected advocate for peasant rights throughout Jalisco. He had discovered that his background as a mechanic provided valuable skills for understanding complex legal machinery and for explaining complicated concepts in terms that ordinary families could understand. The family's new house, built with traditional adobe but incorporating modern amenities, was located at the heart of a small community that had grown around the center. The design reflected both respect for traditional architecture and adaptation to contemporary needs. Solar panels mixed with tile roofs, modern plumbing combined with traditional courtyards filled with medicinal plants and vegetables. Paloma, now 13 years old, was thriving at a boarding school in Guadalajara, specifically designed for academically gifted students from rural backgrounds. Her dream of becoming a teacher had evolved into more ambitious plans. She wanted to study law and education simultaneously to become an advocate for educational rights in rural communities. During her weekend visits home, she taught literacy classes for women in the community and helped organize educational activities for younger children. Her maturity and intelligence impressed everyone who knew her. Many people predicted she would become an important political figure in Mexico's future. Diego, now 11 years old, had become the official chronicler of family history and community historian. His childhood fascination with adventure stories had developed into serious interest in journalism and documentation. He maintained detailed records of the center's activities, interviewed older community members to preserve their stories, and had even begun writing a book about his family's experience. His room in the new house was filled with notebooks, cameras, and recording equipment that community members had donated to support his work. Local newspapers occasionally published his articles about rural life and community organizing efforts. Lucia, the little girl who once spoke regularly with her deceased mother, had grown into a quiet but confident 8-year-old who displayed remarkable sensitivity for understanding human emotions and conflicts. Under Dolores's guidance, she was learning traditional healing practices and herbal medicine, representing a new generation that could bridge ancient wisdom with modern knowledge. Her rag doll, the same one that had protected family documents during the crisis, still accompanied her everywhere, but now she also carried small bags of healing herbs that she prepared under Dolores's supervision. Community members frequently brought sick animals for Lucia to cure, and her success rate was surprisingly high. Dolores, now 80 years old, had become a revered figure whose influence extended far beyond her original role as community midwife. Government officials occasionally consulted her about rural development policies, and university researchers came to study traditional medicine practices she had preserved for decades. Her house in Tonalá had become an informal headquarters for a network of activists and advocates working to protect indigenous and peasant rights throughout central Mexico. Despite her advanced age, she maintained a rigorous schedule of travel, consultation, and teaching that would exhaust people half her age. The center's success attracted attention from national and international organizations. Representatives from the Ford Foundation, Oxfam, and several Mexican government agencies regularly visited to study the Guadalajara model of community-based legal advocacy and economic development. Arturo Mendez, whose reporting had been instrumental in exposing the corruption network, received numerous journalism awards for his work. More importantly to him, his relationship with the Herrera family had evolved into genuine friendship that continued long after professional obligations ended. He visited regularly to document the center's progress and to maintain his personal connection with people who had become family to him. His articles about community development in Jalisco were being translated into English and Portuguese, inspiring similar efforts in other countries with large rural populations. Ana Beatriz Moreno had been promoted to head a specialized unit at the Attorney General's office that focused on cases involving corruption and land rights in rural areas. The Herrera case became a model for how federal agencies could effectively protect vulnerable populations from powerful criminal organizations. She maintained official oversight of several hundred families throughout Mexico whose land rights had been restored under programs inspired by the success in Jalisco. Her reputation for integrity and effectiveness made her a sought-after speaker at international conferences about human rights and rural justice. The region's economic transformation was dramatic. Property values for legitimately owned land increased significantly when buyers gained confidence that property rights would be protected by law. Agricultural productivity improved when farmers felt secure about long-term investment in land improvement and equipment. New businesses established themselves to serve the growing community around the center. A small bank opened a branch specifically to provide microloans for agricultural improvements and small business development. A clinic was established with federal support to provide healthcare services that had previously been unavailable. The university in Guadalajara established an extension program that provided technical education and professional development opportunities directly in the community, eliminating transportation barriers that had previously prevented rural people from accessing higher education. But perhaps the most significant transformation was psychological and cultural. The Herrera family had proved that ordinary people with extraordinary courage could challenge and defeat powerful criminal organizations when they received appropriate support and when the justice system functioned properly. Their story became a symbol throughout rural Mexico of the possibility that dignified resistance could triumph over corruption and violence. Community organizers in other states frequently referenced the buried truck as proof that careful documentation, strategic alliances, and persistent legal action could restore stolen rights even after years of apparent hopelessness. On weekends, when the entire family gathered together in their new home, they maintained certain traditions that connected them with Esperanza's memory and with the values that had sustained them during the crisis. Sunday dinners included an empty chair for Esperanza, decorated with fresh flowers and a blessed candle. Before eating, they observed a moment of silence to remember her and to express gratitude for the opportunities they now possessed. Diego always read a brief summary of the week's activities at the center. Paloma shared news from her studies, and Lucia reported about the healing work she was learning from Dolores. Javier provided updates about legal cases and political developments that might affect other families in similar situations. These family gatherings always ended with a storytelling session where each person shared something new they had learned during the week. This tradition, originally established by Esperanza to encourage learning and curiosity, continued to foster intellectual development and family bonding that kept them closely connected despite their expanding individual activities. On the evening of the second anniversary of the discovery of the buried truck, the entire family walked together to the site where it all began. The location was now marked by a small memorial garden that the community had created to honor all families whose land had been stolen during the period of corruption. As they stood together in the quiet evening, watching stars appear over the Cerro del Águila Dorada, Javier felt a profound sense of completion. Lucia, now too old to believe in conversations with deceased parents, but still wise enough to honor her mother's memory, placed fresh flowers in the memorial garden and whispered, "Thank you, Mama, for teaching us that love is stronger than fear and that truth always finds a way to surface, even when it's buried very deep." And in that moment, surrounded by evidence of everything they had accomplished together, the Herrera family knew their story was no longer about loss and struggle, but about restoration and hope. The pain of losing Esperanza would never disappear completely, but his family had honored her memory in the most meaningful way possible, by refusing to accept injustice and by using their experience to help others. The morning of the third anniversary of the discovery of the buried truck brought to the Herrera family an unexpected letter that would test their capacity for forgiveness in a way they had never imagined. The correspondence arrived through the federal penitentiary system, with official stamps that immediately identified its origin. Javier recognized the sender's name before even opening the envelope: Emilio Restrepo, now serving his 25-year sentence at the high-security federal prison in Puente Grande. The letter was handwritten on common prison paper, but the handwriting was careful, and the language revealed a humility that Javier had never associated with the arrogant man who had threatened his family years before. "Dear Mr. Herrera, I know I have no right to contact your family after all the suffering I caused, but there's something I need to say before it's too late. During 3 years in prison, I've had time to reflect on all the families I destroyed in my pursuit of power and money. Your case in particular haunts me because I saw how my threats affected innocent children. I recently learned that I'm gravely ill. The prison doctors informed me that I may have only a few months to live. Before departing, I want to try to remedy at least part of the damage I caused. In a Swiss bank account, I maintain funds that were originally destined for expansion of my illegal operations. It's approximately $5 million that I would like to transfer to the Esperanza y Rodolfo Community Center to be used to help other families who suffered similar injustices. I also possess information about corruption networks in other Mexican states that could help federal authorities prevent other families from suffering what your family suffered. I don't expect forgiveness, nor do I believe I deserve it. But if your family is willing to accept this reparation as a way to honor your wife's memory, it could give some meaning to the years of pain that my arrogance caused. Sincerely, Emilio Restrepo, Puente Grande Federal Prison." The letter left the family in prolonged silence. It was impossible not to see the irony of the situation. The man who had tried to destroy them was now asking for their help to find redemption before dying. Paloma, now 15 years old and studying ethics in her philosophy classes at school, was the first to speak. "Papa, do you believe this is genuine? Or could it be another manipulation?" Diego, whose interest in journalism had given him critical perspective on human motivations, added, "But even if he's being genuine, does that really change anything? He was still responsible for Mama's death and for years of suffering for our family." Lucia, now 10 years old and still carrying her repaired rag doll, surprised everyone with her mature response. "Aunt Dolores always says that forgiveness isn't for the people who hurt us. It's for ourselves, so we don't have to carry poison in our hearts forever. Javier spent 3 days considering the letter before deciding to consult with people whose wisdom he had learned to respect during the difficult years. Ana Beatriz Moreno, when contacted about the financial offer, confirmed that her investigations had revealed Swiss accounts connected with Restrepo that had never been confiscated because international banking laws made recovery extremely difficult. "If he's offering to transfer those funds voluntarily," she said over the phone, "it could represent significant resources for community development that would otherwise never be recovered." Dolores, whose opinion carried special weight because she had personally witnessed all the family's suffering, offered a perspective that surprised everyone. "In 70 years as a healer, I learned that some wounds only heal when the people who caused them assume responsibility and seek to make amends. We can't heal someone who refuses to recognize they're sick." She paused, collecting her thoughts carefully. "But when a person genuinely recognizes their sickness and seeks healing, sometimes the cure also heals the people who were injured. It could be that this man's repentance is part of the Virgin's plan to bring more healing to our community." Arturo Mendez, when consulted about legal implications, offered a practical perspective. Regardless of his motivations, if he truly has information that could protect other families from similar experiences, we have a moral obligation to investigate. And if the financial resources offered are legitimate, they could fund protection activities for peasant families throughout Mexico. The family debate continued for 2 weeks. Each family member struggled individually with questions about justice, mercy, forgiveness, and responsibility. What obligations did they have toward a person who had genuinely harmed them? What obligations did they have toward future families who might benefit from the resources and information this person could provide? Finally, they decided to visit Restrepo in prison to determine for themselves whether his overture was genuine or just a final manipulation. The trip to Puente Grande was a sobering experience. The maximum security facility housed some of Mexico's most dangerous criminals, and the process of getting authorization to visit required weeks of paperwork and background checks. When they finally sat across from Restrepo in the visiting room, surrounded by guards and separated by reinforced glass, the entire family was struck by the physical transformation that 3 years in prison had produced. The once elegant businessman had lost significant weight and appeared much older than his actual age. His eyes, which had once projected cold calculation and arrogance, now showed weariness and what appeared to be genuine remorse. "Señor Herrera," he began, speaking through the telephone that connected them across the glass barrier, "thank you for coming. I know this must be very difficult for you and your children." His voice was noticeably weaker than it had been during their confrontational encounter years before, and when he looked at Paloma, Diego, and Lucia, his eyes filled with tears. "Children, I know I'm the man who put fear in your hearts when you should have been enjoying childhood happiness. There are no words to express my remorse for that." Lucia, whose childhood ability to see people's inner state had developed into sophisticated emotional intelligence, studied Restrepo carefully before speaking. "Are you really sorry, or are you just scared because you're dying?" The directness of the question clearly affected Restrepo. He was silent for a long moment before answering. "Little one, honestly, both. I'm scared because I'm dying, and that forced me to look back at all the harm I caused. But I'm also genuinely sorry because I finally understand that the pain I inflicted on other people created poison in my own soul that has been eating me alive since I was arrested." Over the course of 2 hours, Restrepo provided detailed information about corruption networks in Michoacán and Sinaloa that helped federal authorities prevent similar land fraud operations. He also provided complete documentation about Swiss bank accounts and explained processes for legitimately transferring funds to non-profit organizations. Before leaving, Javier asked a final question. "Why our family? Why did you target us specifically?" Restrepo's answer revealed a depth of calculation that was disturbing even years later. "Because your wife, Esperanza, was known throughout the region as a respected healer who understood traditional land rights and family histories. My advisors told me that if I could intimidate or neutralize her, other families would be too scared to research their own historical claims." The irony was devastating. Esperanza had been targeted precisely because of her integrity and wisdom, qualities that ultimately enabled her family's victory even after her death. As they left the prison, the entire family felt emotionally drained, but also strangely relieved. They had looked into the face of their former enemy and seen a broken human being rather than the monster that had haunted their memories. 3 months later, when news came that Restrepo had died in prison of liver cancer, the entire family attended a mass in his memory, not to honor him, but to honor the principle of forgiveness that Esperanza had taught them. The $5 million he had transferred to the community center became the foundation for expanding legal advocacy services throughout rural Mexico, eventually helping more than 2,000 families recover stolen land rights. And the information he had provided helped federal authorities prevent an estimated $30 million worth of rural property theft in other regions. In the end, the Herrera family learned that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or excusing the harm that had been done to them. Instead, it was about transforming that harm into opportunity for healing and protection for others. As Lucia wrote in her diary that evening, "Sometimes the people who hurt us most also teach us most about our own strength. Mama would be proud that we chose healing over hatred." 5 years had passed since that transformative morning when a mysterious letter arrived in the Herrera family's life, and now, on a golden September afternoon, the entire Guadalajara community gathered to celebrate something that transcended a simple legal victory: the birth of a movement that had changed the face of rural justice in Mexico. The Esperanza y Rodolfo Community Center had become much more than a place of legal assistance. It was a living symbol that peasant dignity could flourish when it found adequate support. Its activities now extended across 17 Mexican states, a network of hope woven with threads of persistence and solidarity. Javier, now recognized as one of the country's most respected peasant leaders, walked through the center's main courtyard, observing transformations that seemed miraculous. Where before there had been only arid land, now flourished gardens carefully cultivated by the community's women, each plant chosen for both its beauty and medicinal properties. Paloma had returned from her university studies in law with a specialization in agrarian justice that she herself had proposed and developed. At 20 years old, she was already considered one of the country's most brilliant young lawyers, but her true passion remained in serving peasant families who faced injustices similar to those her own family had experienced. That afternoon, she walked through the center's corridors with a briefcase full of documents. 23 new cases she had taken on, each representing a family that had found courage to fight for their rights after hearing the Herrera story. Diego, at 16 years old, had become a respected chronicler whose book, The Buried Truck, had been translated into 8 languages and studied in universities throughout Latin America. But more than a writer, he had become the living memory of the movement, documenting each victory, each challenge, each family that found hope through the center's work. His desk was always covered with letters from families throughout Latin America who had been inspired by his parents' story. Each letter was testimony that courage has the power to multiply across borders and generations. Lucia, now a 15-year-old young woman, had developed a unique synthesis between the traditional medicine she had learned from Dolores and modern knowledge she studied through specialized educational programs. Her reputation as a healer already extended across several communities, and doctors from Guadalajara frequently consulted her about holistic treatments. Her old ragdoll, now carefully preserved in a glass case at the center, had become a symbol of resistance and protection. Children from other families in crisis frequently asked to touch it, believing it carried within itself something of the strength that had protected the Herreras in their darkest moments. Dolores, now 85 years old, continued to be the spiritual heart of the movement. Her wisdom had transcended the boundaries of traditional medicine to become a life philosophy that guided all the center's work. High-ranking government officials frequently consulted her before implementing rural policies, recognizing that her understanding of peasant needs was deeper than any academic study. On that special afternoon, she moved through the center's anniversary celebration with the grace of someone who had found their true purpose in life. Her eyes shone with the satisfaction of one who had lived long enough to see their seeds transform into a forest of hope. Ana Beatriz Moreno arrived from Mexico City, carrying news that would make that celebration even more significant. The President of the Republic had signed a law creating the Automated Ejidal Registry, a national system that would permanently protect peasant property rights using technology that would make repetition of frauds like those perpetrated by Restrepo practically impossible. The law will be known as the Esperanza Law, she announced to the crowd gathered in the central courtyard. In memory of a woman who never lived to see victory, but whose love for her family initiated a transformation that will protect millions of future families. Arturo Mendez, whose journalistic work had gained international recognition, had traveled from Buenos Aires, where he was documenting similar rural justice movements. His presence at the celebration represented recognition that the Herrera story had transcended national borders to become a universal symbol of how persistence can triumph over corruption. During his speech, he reminded the community that true victory lay not only in recovering lands or punishing the guilty, but in demonstrating that ordinary people could confront and defeat oppression systems when they found adequate support and maintained their dignity intact. The celebration's most emotional moment came when Lucia, now the youngest spokesperson for the Mexican peasant movement, climbed onto the small stage built in the center of the courtyard. Her voice, clear and strong, resonated through the crowd. 5 years ago, we were a broken family, frightened and apparently without hope. Today, we're part of a much larger family that extends throughout our country and beyond. We learned that injustice may seem powerful, but truth has an even greater force. She paused, her eyes scanning the hundreds of faces listening to her. My mother, Esperanza, didn't live to see this victory with her own eyes. But I know she's here with us, in the courage of every family that refuses to accept injustice, in the wisdom of every child who learns it's worth fighting for what's right, in the strength of every person who chooses hope instead of despair. When the formal celebration ended and crowds began to disperse, the Herrera family remained at the center, as they had done so many times during the previous years. The silence that followed wasn't the empty silence of despair that had once characterized their lives, but the full silence of contemplation and gratitude. Javier looked at his children, now young adults who had found their own ways to serve the world, and felt a profound sense of completeness. They had honored Esperanza's memory in the best possible way, transforming their pain into purpose, their loss into legacy. Paloma broke the silence with an observation that perfectly captured the moment's meaning. Papa, do you remember when we thought our family had lost everything? Now I realize we actually found everything. We found our strength, our purpose, our true community, Diego added, with the perspective of one who had documented every moment of the journey. And we learned that some stories never really end. They transform into other stories, inspire other families, create other miracles. Lucia, gently touching the place where her doll used to be kept, whispered, Mama always said that true love never dies. It just changes form. I think our family proved that's true. When night finally enveloped the center in its soft darkness, the Herrera family walked slowly toward their house, knowing they had participated in something much greater than a simple legal victory. They had been part of a transformation that proved human dignity has the power to overcome any obstacle when it finds courage to manifest. In the starry sky above Guadalajara, the stars shone with particular intensity, as if celebrating alongside all those who had learned that hope isn't just a feeling, but a transformative force, capable of moving mountains of injustice and planting gardens of possibility, where before there had been only desert of despair. And in the collective memory of all who had been touched by the story of the family that discovered a buried truck and found within it a treasure much greater than money, they found proof that love and truth are indestructible forces that continue growing long after those who planted them completed their earthly journey. The night's last word belonged to the gentle wind that blew through the center's gardens, whispering through the leaves a message that seemed to come directly from Esperanza's heart. Land isn't sold, it's defended, but more importantly still, it's loved, it's honored, and it's passed to future generations as an inheritance of dignity and hope.